The blood-red sunset painted the Iowa horizon as Violet Bennett trudged along the dusty trail leading to Council Bluffs, her arms aching from carrying her 3-month-old son. She had been walking for days, fleeing the burning remains of what had once been her home, with nothing but the clothes on her back and her precious child wrapped in a tattered blanket. It was 1876, and the West was as unforgiving as it was vast. Violet's husband had been killed 6 weeks earlier in a dispute over water rights, leaving her alone with an infant and nowhere to turn. At 22, she had already witnessed more hardship than most saw in a lifetime. "Just a little farther, Thomas," she whispered to her sleeping baby, her voice hoarse from thirst. "They say Council Bluffs has work for everyone. We'll find something there." The evening air grew chilly as the sun disappeared behind the rolling hills. Violet spotted a barn in the distance, its weathered wood standing stark against the darkening sky. With renewed determination, she quickened her pace, praying the owner might allow her shelter for the night. As she approached, she could see it was an old structure, abandoned perhaps, with gaps in the walls where boards had fallen away. But it would provide more protection than the open trail. Violet pushed open the creaking door and peered inside. Moonlight filtered through the roof, illuminating piles of straw and forgotten farm implements. "This will do for tonight," she said to herself, carefully settling Thomas in a small depression she made in a pile of clean straw. The baby stirred briefly before falling back into peaceful slumber. Violet covered him with her shawl and kissed his forehead, her heart aching with a mixture of love and worry. How would she provide for him? What future could she possibly offer? She had barely settled beside her makeshift crib when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her freeze. Panicking, Violet looked around for a place to hide, but it was too late. The barn door swung open wider and a tall silhouette appeared in the entrance. "Who's in here?" a deep voice called out. "This is private property." Violet stood, placing herself between the stranger and her baby. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "We'll leave. I just needed a place for the night." The figure stepped forward into a shaft of moonlight, revealing a man in his late 20s, with a weathered face and intelligent eyes beneath the brim of his dusty hat. A star-shaped badge glinted on his vest. "I'm Deputy Noah Walters," he said, his tone softening as he noticed the baby in the straw. "Where are you headed, madam?" "Council Bluffs," Violet replied, watching him warily. "I'm looking for work." Noah's gaze moved from Violet to the infant and back again. "You're a long way from town still, at least 10 miles. His eyes narrowed with concern. "Have you eaten today?" Violet hesitated before shaking her head. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Noah sighed and removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "This barn belongs to the Thompson farm. Old man Thompson passed last winter, and his son hasn't decided what to do with the place yet." He glanced at the baby again. "Your little one there. Is he all right sleeping like that?" "He's fine," Violet said defensively. "I've made sure the straw is clean." Noah approached slowly, as if afraid of frightening her. When he was close enough to see the sleeping infant clearly, something in his expression changed. "Her baby slept in a basket of straw," he murmured, then looked up at Violet with determination. "He'll sleep in my arms tonight, and you both will have a proper bed." "I don't accept charity from strangers," Violet said, though her legs felt weak with exhaustion. "It's not charity, madam. It's common decency." Noah's voice was firm but kind. "My cabin's not far. You can rest there tonight, get a hot meal, and continue to town tomorrow if that's still your wish." Violet studied him, searching for signs of deception or ill intent, but found only sincerity in his steady gaze. "Very well," she finally agreed, "but just for tonight." Noah nodded and carefully lifted Thomas from his bed of straw, cradling the infant with surprising gentleness for a man of his size. "I've got him," he said softly when Violet instinctively reached to take her son back. "You look dead on your feet, madam. Save your strength for the ride." Outside, Noah's horse waited patiently. With Thomas securely held in one arm, Noah helped Violet onto the saddle before mounting behind her. The closeness felt strange after weeks of isolation, but Violet was too tired to protest. As they rode through the darkening prairie toward the distant lights of a cabin, Violet fought to stay awake, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the warmth of the man behind her. Noah's cabin was modest but clean, with a small corral for his horse and a vegetable garden to the side. Inside, a fire burned low in the hearth, and a pot of something that smelled delicious hung over the flames. "It's just stew," Noah said, noticing her gaze. "Nothing fancy, but it'll fill your belly." While Violet ate ravenously, Noah tended to Thomas, changing the baby's cloth diaper with practiced movements that surprised her. "You seem to know your way around infants," she observed between bites. Noah smiled, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "My sister had 4 little ones before the fever took her and her husband 2 years back. The children live with my parents in Missouri now." He gently rocked Thomas, who had awakened and was regarding Noah with curious eyes. "What's his name?" "Thomas," Violet replied. "After his father." "A fine name." Noah touched the baby's tiny hand, his expression softening when Thomas gripped his finger. "And yours, madam, if I may ask?" Violet Bennett." "Well, Mrs. Bennett, miss," she corrected quickly. "I was never married in the eyes of the law. Thomas and I lived on a homestead near Fort Kearney with his father. We were to be married come spring, but—" She trailed off, the memory still too painful to articulate. Noah nodded, understanding without requiring details. "Miss Bennett, then. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. The town's looking for a schoolteacher, if you've had any education. The last one left for California 2 months ago." Violet's heart leaped. "I was educated in Boston before my parents died. I can read and write and do sums." "Then you might just find what you're looking for in Council Bluffs," Noah said with a smile. "But not tonight. Tonight you rest." He showed her to his bed, insisting he would sleep on a pallet by the fire. As Violet settled beneath clean blankets that smelled of soap and pine, Thomas nestled against her. She felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: safety. From his place by the hearth, Noah watched over the sleeping pair, his mind racing with thoughts he knew he shouldn't entertain. There was something about this determined young woman that stirred feelings he had long suppressed. But she was clearly running from something, and the last thing she needed was another complication in her life. Still, as he drifted off to sleep, Noah Walters couldn't help but wonder what it might be like to have Violet Bennett and her son remain more than just a single night under his roof. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the cabin's small windows. Violet woke to the sound of quiet conversation and the smell of coffee. For a moment she was disoriented, then remembered the events of the previous night. Thomas was no longer beside her. Alarmed, she sat up quickly. "Good morning," Noah said from the table, where he sat feeding Thomas with a small cloth dipped in milk. "Hope you don't mind. Little fellow here was making hungry noises and I didn't want to wake you." Violet relaxed, watching the scene with wonder. "You're very good with him." "He's an easy baby," Noah replied, smiling down at Thomas. "Got a strong grip too. Going to make a fine cowhand someday." Violet rose and joined them at the table, accepting the cup of coffee Noah poured for her. "Thank you for your kindness, Deputy Walters. We'll be on our way to town after breakfast." Noah's smile faded slightly. "Of course. though the offer stands you're welcome here until you find suitable arrangements. Over a breakfast of cornmeal mush and bacon, Noah explained his role in Council Bluffs. I'm technically a deputy for the whole county, but I spend most of my time in town. Sheriff Hawkins is getting on in years, so I handle most of the day-to-day matters. Is it dangerous work? Violet asked, suddenly concerned for the man who had shown them such kindness. Noah shrugged. Can be. Council Bluffs has quieted down some since the railroad came through, but we get our share of trouble. Mostly drunken cowboys and the occasional dispute between settlers. After breakfast, Noah insisted on driving Violet and Thomas into town in his wagon rather than having them walk. The day was warm, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers across the rolling prairie. Violet sat beside Noah on the wagon seat, Thomas contentedly sleeping in her arms. The town's grown considerable in the last few years, Noah explained as they approached Council Bluffs. The railroad brings new folks through regular. Some stay, some move on. Council Bluffs was larger than Violet had expected, with a proper main street lined with wooden sidewalks and storefronts. A church steeple rose above the buildings, and children played in the schoolyard beyond. That would be your domain if you take the teaching position, Noah said, nodding toward the whitewashed schoolhouse. 28 students last count, ages 6 to 16. Violet felt a flutter of excitement at the prospect. Teaching had always been a dream of hers, one that had seemed impossible during her hardscrabble existence on the homestead. Noah directed the wagon to a 2-story building with a sign proclaiming it the Council Bluffs Hotel and Boarding House. Mrs. Miller runs this place, he explained as he helped Violet down. She's stern but fair, and she has a soft spot for children. Mention my name and she'll give you a fair price on a room. Violet hesitated, clutching Thomas closer. I don't have much money. Noah's expression was kind. Tell her I sent you and that you're here about the teaching position. She'll work something out until you get your first month's pay. Inside the boarding house, they were greeted by a plump woman in her 50s, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. Mrs. Miller's initial frown melted when she saw Thomas and heard Noah's introduction. A teacher, you say? Mrs. Miller looked Violet up and down critically. Well, we surely need one. The children are running wild as jackrabbits. Can you manage discipline, young lady? Some of our older boys can be quite troublesome. I can handle myself, madam, Violet assured her, standing straighter. And I believe every child deserves an education, regardless of their behavior. Mrs. Miller nodded approvingly. You'll want to speak with Mayor Hayes. His office is next to the general store. She glanced at Thomas. The baby. Will he be a distraction to your teaching? Before Violet could respond, Noah stepped forward. I've offered to help with the child while Miss Bennett is teaching. My office is just down the street from the school. Violet looked at him in surprise. This was the first she'd heard of such an arrangement. Mrs. Miller raised an eyebrow but nodded. Very well. I have a small room on the second floor with a crib. Previous tenant left it behind when they moved west. It's yours for $2 a week, meals included. It was more than Violet had hoped for. Thank you, Mrs. Miller. I'm grateful. After settling the arrangements and depositing Violet's meager belongings in her new room, Noah accompanied her to the mayor's office. Mayor Hayes, a portly man with impressive mutton chops, was eager to hire a new teacher immediately. School's been closed for 2 months, he explained, shuffling through papers on his cluttered desk. Parents are complaining their children are forgetting what little they learned. Can you start Monday next? Yes, sir, Violet agreed, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Excellent. Mayor Hayes scribbled on a document and pushed it toward her. $30 a month, plus you can live in the teacherage if you prefer a small cabin behind the school. Though with a baby, perhaps Mrs. Miller's would be better for now. As they left the mayor's office, Violet turned to Noah, her expression troubled. You didn't have to offer to watch Thomas. I wouldn't want to impose further. Noah looked down at the baby, who was awake now and studying his surroundings with wide eyes. It wasn't an imposition. I meant it. His gaze met hers. Unless you'd rather I didn't, Violet hesitated. The idea of entrusting her son to someone else, even someone as kind as Deputy Walters, made her uneasy. Yet what alternative did she have? I would be very grateful, she finally said. But only until I can make other arrangements. Noah nodded, though something in his eyes suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with this condition. Of course. Now, how about I show you around town? You'll want to know where everything is. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of introductions and new places. Noah seemed to know everyone, and everywhere they went, people greeted him warmly. Violet noticed the curious glances directed her way, the whispered speculations that followed their passing. By the time they returned to the boarding house for supper, she was exhausted but hopeful. You've given us a fresh start, she told Noah as they stood on the boarding house porch. I don't know how to thank you. No thanks necessary, he replied, his hat in his hands. I'm just glad you found your way to that barn last night. As Noah turned to leave, Thomas began to fuss. Violet bounced him gently, but the baby's cries only intensified. May I? Noah asked, reaching for Thomas. Violet hesitated only briefly before handing her son over. Immediately, Thomas quieted, his tiny hands reaching for Noah's beard. Well, I'll be, Violet said with a small laugh. He's taken quite a shine to you. The feeling's mutual, Noah replied, his voice soft as he gazed down at the infant. When he looked up again, there was something new in his expression, something that made Violet's heart beat faster. I'll come by tomorrow to help you get settled. Maybe show you the schoolhouse so you can start planning your lessons. Violet nodded, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how the fading light cast shadows across his strong features. I would like that. After Noah left, Violet sat by the window in her small room, watching as he walked down the street toward his own lodgings above the jail. Thomas slept peacefully in the crib, exhausted from the day's adventures. We might be all right here, Violet whispered to her sleeping son. We just might. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Noah was true to his word, helping Violet clean and organize the long-neglected schoolhouse while taking turns watching Thomas. Together, they scrubbed desks, mended broken windows, and organized the meager supply of textbooks. Most families can't afford their own books, Noah explained as they cataloged what was available. The children share, passing them down as they advance. Violet ran her fingers over a well-worn McGuffey reader. I'll need to create lessons that work for different levels in the same classroom. You'll manage, Noah said with a confidence that bolstered her own. The children here are eager to learn. They just need someone who cares enough to teach them properly. On Sunday, Noah invited Violet to attend church with him, an invitation she accepted with some hesitation. She hadn't set foot in a church since leaving Boston, her faith having wavered during the hardships of the past few years. The small white church was packed when they arrived, and heads turned to observe the newcomer and her baby. Violet felt self-conscious in her plain dress, but Noah guided her to a pew with a reassuring hand at the small of her back. Throughout the service, Violet was acutely aware of Noah beside her, of how naturally he held Thomas when the baby grew restless, of the respect with which the townspeople greeted him. This was a man who had earned his place in this community, who was valued and trusted. After church, They were invited to Sunday dinner at the home of the Pembroke family, whose 3 children would be among Violet's students. The meal was simple but plentiful, and the conversation flowed easily. For the first time in years, Violet felt part of something larger than her own struggles. As they walked back to the boarding house in the golden afternoon light, Noah carrying a sleeping Thomas, Violet found herself studying the deputy's profile, noting the way the sunlight caught in his dark hair, the slight crow's feet at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. "You're staring, Miss Bennett," Noah said without looking at her, though a smile played at the corners of his mouth. Violet felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was just thinking how fortunate I am to have met you." Noah glanced at her then, his expression serious. "I believe the fortune is mine." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities, until Thomas stirred and broke the spell. "Tomorrow's your first day of teaching," Noah said as they reached the boarding house. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," Violet admitted with a small laugh. "What if the children don't respect me? What if I can't teach them properly?" Noah carefully transferred Thomas back to her arms. "You'll do fine. Just remember, most of these children have never had a proper education. Anything you teach them will be more than they had before." His confidence in her was like a warm cloak against the chill of her doubts. "Thank you, Noah." It was the first time she had used his given name, and the effect was immediate. His eyes softened, and something in his stance changed, becoming less formal. "Violet," he replied, her name sounding like a caress when spoken in his deep voice. "Get some rest. I'll come for Thomas in the morning before school starts." That night, as Violet prepared for bed, she found herself humming a lullaby her mother had sung to her as a child. Thomas watched her with solemn eyes from his crib, his tiny fist wrapped around her finger. "We're going to build a life here," she promised him. "A good one." And for the first time since Thomas's father had died, Violet felt it might actually be possible. The first day of school dawned bright and clear. Violet dressed in her best dress, a navy blue cotton with white cuffs that she had carefully washed and pressed the night before. After feeding and changing Thomas, she met Noah downstairs in the boarding house dining room. "Ready for your big day, Miss Bennett?" he asked, accepting Thomas with practiced ease. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, adjusting her hair one last time. Noah watched her fuss with her appearance, an amused smile playing on his lips. "You look perfect." "The children will be more interested in what you have to say than how you look, anyway." Violet laughed nervously. "I hope so. Though I imagine they'll be more interested in getting out to play than in anything I have to teach them." "Don't sell yourself short," Noah said, his expression serious now. "Education is a precious gift out here. Most of these children have parents who never learned to read themselves." With one last kiss to Thomas's forehead, Violet squared her shoulders and headed for the schoolhouse. By the time she arrived, several children were already waiting outside, regarding her with curious eyes as she unlocked the door. "Good morning," she greeted them, trying to project a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "I'm Miss Bennett, your new teacher." A tall boy of about 14 looked her up and down skeptically. "You don't look much older than my sister, and she's 16. Before Violet could respond, a girl with braided red hair elbowed the boy sharply. "Don't be rude, Jimmy. Pa said we're lucky to have a real educated teacher." "Thank you," Violet said to the girl with a smile. "And you are Sarah Pembroke, madam. We had dinner together on Sunday, remember? Of course, Sarah. Would you like to help me prepare for the day?" By 9 o'clock, the schoolhouse was filled with 24 children of various ages, all watching Violet with expressions ranging from curiosity to indifference to outright suspicion. She took a deep breath and rang the small bell on her desk. "Welcome, everyone." As I said, I am Miss Bennett and I will be your teacher. I look forward to getting to know each of you and helping you learn and grow. She picked up a slate and chalk. Let's start by learning your names and a little about what you've been studying. The morning progressed better than Violet had dared hope. The children, though restless after months without formal schooling, were mostly eager to impress the new teacher. Even Jimmy, the skeptical older boy, eventually participated in the geography lesson, correctly identifying the Mississippi River on the faded wall map. At noon, Violet dismissed the children for their lunch break and sat down heavily at her desk, exhausted but exhilarated. She was so absorbed in reviewing her plans for the afternoon that she didn't notice Noah entering the schoolhouse until he spoke. "Seems to be going well," he said, startling her. "Sorry, didn't mean to surprise you." Violet looked up to see him standing in the doorway, Thomas contentedly cradled in one arm. The sight of them together sent a strange flutter through her chest. "How did you know?" she asked, rising to take Thomas for a moment. Inhaling the sweet scent of his head, Noah grinned. "I may have ridden by once or twice." The children were actually sitting at their desks, which is more than the last teacher managed most days. Violet laughed, some of her tension easing. "They've been very patient with me. How has Thomas been?" "Perfect gentleman," Noah replied, stroking the baby's cheek with one finger. "Charmed everyone at the sheriff's office. Even old Hawkins smiled at him, and I didn't think the man's face could still do that." Violet reluctantly handed Thomas back. "I should eat something before the afternoon session. You're sure you don't mind keeping him a few more hours?" "Not at all," Noah assured her. "Take your time. We're getting along just fine, aren't we, little partner?" Thomas gurgled in response, and Noah's smile widened. "See, we understand each other perfectly." As the weeks passed, Violet settled into a routine. Mornings and afternoons were devoted to teaching, while evenings were spent planning lessons and caring for Thomas. Noah continued to watch the baby during school hours, often bringing him to meet Violet after dismissal, so they could walk back to the boarding house together. These walks became the highlight of Violet's days. Noah would tell her about happenings around town or interesting cases he'd handled, while she shared stories about the children's progress or amusing incidents from the classroom. Sometimes they would stop at the general store, where Noah would insist on buying small treats for Thomas or supplies for Violet's classroom, brushing aside her protests. "Consider it an investment in the future of Council Bluffs," he would say with a wink that made her heart skip. The townspeople quickly accepted Violet's presence, especially as they saw the positive effect she was having on their children. Parents stopped her on the street to express their gratitude, and Mrs. Miller, initially stern and distant, began saving the best portions at dinner for the hard-working teacher and her beautiful boy. One evening in late September, as Violet sat on the boarding house porch enjoying the cool air after putting Thomas to bed, Noah arrived with an unexpected proposal. "The Harvest Festival is next Saturday," he said without preamble. "I thought perhaps you and Thomas might like to attend with me." Violet looked up from her mending, surprised by the formal tone. "I'd assumed we would both be there anyway. The whole town attends, don't they?" Noah shifted his weight, unusually hesitant. "Yes, but I meant, that is, I was hoping you would accompany me, as my guest." The implications of his invitation weren't lost on Violet. This wasn't just a friendly outing, it was a public declaration of interest. "Noah, She paused, uncertain how to respond. Part of her wanted to accept immediately, while another part, the cautious part that had protected her through so much hardship, urged restraint. "You don't have to answer now," he said quickly, sensing her hesitation. "Just think about it." "It's not that I don't want to," Violet said softly. It's just Thomas and I come with complications. My past isn't exactly straightforward." Noah's expression softened. "Violet, we all have pasts. It's the future I'm interested in." The simple statement, delivered with such sincerity, brought tears to Violet's eyes. "Then yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We would be honored to accompany you to the festival." The smile that lit Noah's face was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. "I'll pick you both up at noon. There's dancing in the evening if you're not too tired from chasing after those students of yours all week." "I think I could find the energy for a dance or two," Violet replied, returning his smile. After Noah left, Violet sat for a long time on the porch, her mending forgotten in her lap. Was she ready for this? To allow someone new into her life, into Thomas's life? Noah was kind and steady, everything Thomas's father hadn't been, but the memory of past pain still lingered. Yet as she finally rose to go inside, Violet found herself anticipating the festival with an excitement she hadn't felt in years. The day of the Harvest Festival arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp air, blue skies, and just enough breeze to rustle the changing leaves. Violet spent extra time on her appearance, wearing her best dress and arranging her hair in a style she hadn't attempted since coming west. Thomas was dressed in a clean gown that Mrs. Miller had helped her sew from flour sacks, embellished with simple embroidery around the collar. When Noah arrived to escort them, his appreciative gaze made Violet blush like a schoolgirl. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. The town square had been transformed for the festival. Tables laden with food lined one side, while the other featured displays of handiwork, preserves, and farm produce being judged for prizes. Children ran about playing games, and a group of musicians tuned their instruments on a small wooden platform that would serve as the dance floor later. Throughout the afternoon, Noah stayed close to Violet and Thomas, introducing them to people they hadn't yet met, bringing them plates of food, and generally ensuring they were enjoying themselves. When Thomas became fussy in the late afternoon, Noah didn't hesitate to take him, walking the baby around the square until he fell asleep. "He's good with the little one," Mrs. Pembroke commented as she and Violet watched Noah from across the square. Not many bachelors would take so naturally to another man's child. Violet tensed slightly at the implied question about Thomas's parentage, but Mrs. Pembroke continued without waiting for a response. "Deputy Walters is a good man. Lost his sweetheart to typhoid 5 years back before he came to Council Bluffs. Some thought he'd never look at another woman again, but the way he looks at you." She patted Violet's hand. "Well, it does my heart good to see." The revelation about Noah's past gave Violet a new perspective on his kindness toward her and Thomas. Perhaps he understood loss better than she had realized. As evening approached and lanterns were lit around the square, the music began in earnest. Couples took to the dance floor and children danced in their own energetic circles nearby. "Would you care to dance?" Noah asked, Thomas still sleeping peacefully against his shoulder. Violet hesitated, glancing at her son. "What about Thomas, Mrs. Miller offered to watch him for a while," Noah replied, nodding toward the boarding house proprietor, who was approaching with a smile. "Said it's been too long since she held a baby, and you deserve some time to enjoy yourself." With Thomas safely in Mrs. Miller's experienced arms, Violet allowed Noah to lead her onto the dance floor. His hand was warm and steady at her waist, guiding her through a waltz with surprising grace for such a tall man. "You dance well," she commented, looking up into his eyes. "My mother insisted all her sons learn proper manners, dancing included," he replied with a smile. "Said no woman would have us otherwise. Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She is." Noah's expression grew thoughtful. You would like her, I think, and she would definitely like you. The simple statement held weighty implications that Violet wasn't ready to examine too closely. Instead, she allowed herself to be swept up in the music and the moment, enjoying the feeling of being held in Noah's arms without the practical necessity that usually dictated their closeness. As the evening progressed and the stars emerged in the clear sky above, Violet found herself relaxing completely for the first time in years. The music, the laughter, the warm September night, it all combined to create a sense of belonging she had almost forgotten was possible. During a break in the dancing, Noah led her away from the crowd to a quiet corner beneath a large oak tree. Thomas was now awake and contentedly watching the festivities from Mrs. Miller's lap across the square. "I have something to ask you," Noah said, his expression serious in the lantern light. "And I want you to know that you can say no without any fear of changing things between us." Violet's heart began to race. "What is it?" Noah took a deep breath. "The teacherage behind the school, I know it needs work, but with some repairs, it could be a proper home for you and Thomas. More space than the boarding house room, and you wouldn't have to walk so far each day." It wasn't what Violet had expected him to say, and she wasn't sure whether to be relieved or disappointed. "I've thought about it, but it would need a lot of work before winter sets in." "That's what I wanted to discuss," Noah continued. "I've spoken with some of the men in town. We could have it fixed up in a week or two if you're agreeable. New roof, solid windows, proper stove." "That's very generous, but I couldn't ask. You're not asking. We're offering." Noah's gaze was steady. "This town needs a teacher, Violet. The parents want to know you'll stay, not move on once something better comes along. Having your own home here would be a sign of permanence." Violet considered the proposal. The tiny cabin behind the schoolhouse would indeed be more convenient, and the idea of having her own space again was appealing. But the real question seemed to be lurking just beneath the surface of Noah's practical suggestions. "And what about you, Noah?" she asked softly. "Where do you fit into this plan for permanence?" Noah's expression shifted, a vulnerability appearing that she had never seen before. "That depends entirely on you, Violet. I care for you and Thomas more than I probably should admit this soon, but I'm not asking for any promises tonight. Just let us help you make a home here, and we'll see where time takes us." His honesty was disarming. There were no pretty words or grand declarations, just the simple truth of a man who had known loss and was cautious about reaching for happiness again. "All right," Violet agreed. "If the town wants to help repair the teacherage, I would be grateful to accept." The smile that broke across Noah's face was worth any lingering doubts she might have harbored. He took her hand and brought it briefly to his lips. "Thank you." The rest of the evening passed in a pleasant haze. They danced again, enjoyed pie and coffee with friends, and finally walked home under a canopy of stars, Thomas sleeping contentedly in Noah's arms as had become their custom. At the boarding house door, Noah gently transferred the sleeping baby to Violet. "I'll start organizing the work on the teacherage tomorrow. With enough hands, it won't take long." "You've done so much for us already," Violet said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Seeing you and Thomas happy and settled here is all the payment I need," Noah replied. Then, with a gentleness that brought tears to her eyes, he leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to her cheek. "Good night, Violet." As she watched him walk away down the moonlit street, Violet touched her cheek where his lips had been. For the first time since fleeing her burning homestead, she allowed herself to imagine a future filled with more than just survival, a future that included the kind-hearted deputy who had changed her life with a simple act of compassion on a dark night not so long ago. True to Noah's word, Work on the teacherage began the very next day. Men from all over Council Bluffs arrived with tools and materials, many of them fathers of Violet's students eager to ensure their children's teacher had a proper home. The small cabin was transformed over the course of 2 weeks. The leaking roof was replaced, walls were reinforced and plastered, new windows were installed, and a sturdy iron stove was positioned to provide heat throughout the 2 rooms. The women of the town contributed as well, sewing curtains, providing dishes and cookware, and even assembling a proper crib for Thomas to replace the borrowed one from the boarding house. Noah oversaw the work, stopping by the schoolhouse during lunch breaks to report progress to Violet. His dedication to the project was apparent to everyone, and Violet couldn't help but notice the knowing glances exchanged among the townspeople whenever they were together. On a crisp October afternoon, Noah appeared at the schoolhouse door just as Violet was dismissing her students for the day. His expression was one of barely contained excitement. "It's ready," he announced once the last child had departed. "Would you like to see it?" Violet quickly gathered Thomas from his basket in the corner, where he had been napping after Noah had brought him to her for his midday feeding. "Yes, of course." The teacherage stood approximately 50 yards behind the schoolhouse, a modest structure nestled among a small grove of trees. As they approached, Violet could hardly believe the transformation. What had been a dilapidated shack was now a proper small home, with a freshly painted door and smoke curling invitingly from the chimney. Mrs. Pembroke started a fire in the stove earlier to warm it up, Noah explained as he opened the door for her. Violet stepped inside and gasped. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a small table and chairs, a comfortable-looking rocking chair by the stove, and shelves filled with basic provisions. A doorway led to the bedroom, where a bed with a handmade quilt and Thomas's crib awaited. "Noah, this is..." Words failed her as emotion welled up in her throat. "You like it?" he asked, his eyes searching her face anxiously. "Like it? It's perfect." Violet turned in a slow circle, taking in all the details: the curtains at the windows, the rag rug on the floor, the simple but sturdy furniture. "I can't believe everyone did this for us." "The town values its teacher," Noah said, though his expression suggested there was more to it than that. "And the people here have come to care for you and Thomas." "And you?" Violet asked softly, meeting his gaze. "Did you do all this because the town values its teacher?" Noah's eyes never left hers. "I did this because I value you, Violet, because seeing you and Thomas settled and happy matters to me more than I can say." The honesty in his voice made something shift inside Violet, a final wall of reserve crumbling away. She stepped closer to him, Thomas cradled between them. "We value you too, Noah, more than I've been brave enough to admit." For a long moment, they stood there in the warm light of the late afternoon, the weight of unspoken feelings hanging in the air between them. Then Thomas squirmed and let out a small cry, breaking the spell. Noah cleared his throat. "There's fresh milk in the cold box and enough food to get you through a few days. Mrs. Miller packed your things from the boarding house. They're in the bedroom." "Will you stay for supper?" Violet asked impulsively. "It's the least I can do after everything." Noah's smile lit up his entire face. "I'd like that very much." That evening marked the beginning of a new chapter. Supper in the teacherage became a regular occurrence, with Noah stopping by 3 or 4 times a week to share a meal and help with Thomas. The people of Council Bluffs observed this development with approval, many openly commenting that the deputy and the schoolteacher made a fine couple. As October gave way to November and the first snow dusted the prairie, Violet found herself looking forward to Noah's visits with increasing anticipation. Thomas, too, seemed to thrive in Noah's presence, his eyes lighting up whenever the deputy entered the room. One evening, as they sat by the stove after supper, Thomas asleep in Noah's lap, Violet finally gathered the courage to ask about his past. "Mrs. Pembroke mentioned you lost someone before you came to Council Bluffs." Noah's hands stilled where they had been gently stroking Thomas's back. For a moment, Violet feared she had overstepped, but then he nodded. "Her name was Alina. We were to be married in the spring of '71. Typhoid came through our town that winter." His voice was steady, but pain lingered in his eyes. "She was gone within a week." "I'm sorry," Violet said softly, reaching across to touch his hand. Noah turned his palm up to meet hers, their fingers intertwining. "I came west afterward. Couldn't bear to stay where everything reminded me of her. Ended up here, and something about Council Bluffs felt right. A place to start over. And have you started over?" His gaze was warm as it met hers. "I believe I have, though I never expected it to happen quite like this." The moment hung between them, full of possibility, until Thomas stirred and Noah carefully adjusted the sleeping baby. "What about you?" he asked. "You've never spoken much about Thomas's father." Violet sighed, knowing it was only fair she share her own past. "His name was Thomas Sr. We met in Fort Kearny when I was working as a waitress in the hotel dining room. He was passing through on his way to stake a claim farther west." She paused, the memories still painful despite the time that had passed. "He was charming, full of big dreams. Asked me to go with him, promised we'd build a life together." "But you weren't married." Noah's tone held no judgment, only curiosity. "We planned to be. He said we would go to the nearest town with a proper church once we were settled." Violet looked down at her hands. "I believed him. By the time I realized he had no intention of making it official, I was already carrying Thomas, and then—" "What happened to him?" Noah asked gently. "There was a dispute with a neighboring homesteader over water rights. Thomas Sr. wasn't one to back down from a fight. It turned ugly." Violet swallowed hard. "He was shot. Died 3 days later. Fever took him." Noah's hand tightened around hers. "And you were left alone." Violet nodded. "The neighbor who shot him came back a month after Thomas was born. Said the land was his now, that I had no legal claim without a husband. When I refused to leave, he burned us out." Her voice caught. "I grabbed Thomas and what little I could carry and just started walking. Eventually ended up in that barn where you found us." "I'm glad I found you," Noah said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Though I hate to think what you went through before that night." They sat in silence for a while, hands still joined, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and Thomas's soft breathing. "We're quite the pair, aren't we?" Violet finally said with a sad smile. "Both running from ghosts." "Not running anymore," Noah corrected gently. "At least I'm not. I think I've found what I was looking for, even though I didn't know I was searching." The simple declaration warmed Violet to her core. "I think perhaps I have too." As November deepened into December, Council Bluffs prepared for Christmas. The schoolchildren were busy making decorations and practicing carols for the Christmas Eve service, while the women of the town organized a community dinner to follow. Violet threw herself into the preparations, determined to make the holiday special for her students and for Thomas, even though he was too young to understand the significance. Noah continued his regular visits, often bringing small gifts: a ribbon for her hair, a wooden rattle he had carved for Thomas, fresh venison after a hunting trip. One evening a week before Christmas, Noah arrived at the teacherage with his arms full of pine boughs. "I thought we might bring a bit of Christmas cheer in here," he explained, stamping snow from his boots at the door. Together, they arranged the greenery around the small cabin, the fresh pine scent filling the rooms. Noah had also brought a small carved wooden star which he placed on the highest shelf. "It's beautiful," Violet said, admiring the simple decoration. "Did you make it?" Noah nodded, a hint of shyness in his expression. Wanted Thomas to have something special for his first Christmas. Something he can keep. The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought tears to Violet's eyes. "You think of everything." "Not everything," Noah replied with a smile. "I still haven't figured out what to get his mother for Christmas." "You don't need to get me anything," Violet protested. "You've done more than enough already." Noah moved closer, his eyes intent on hers. "What if I want to?" The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feelings. Violet was acutely aware of his nearness, of the way the firelight played across his features. "Noah," she began, uncertain what she wanted to say. "I love you," he said simply, the words falling between them like stones into still water. "I love you and I love Thomas. I know it hasn't been long, and your life has had enough upheaval without me adding to it, but I can't keep pretending my feelings are anything less than what they are." Violet stood perfectly still, her heart pounding in her chest. The words she had both longed for and feared had finally been spoken aloud. "You don't have to say anything now," Noah continued when she remained silent. "I just needed you to know. Whatever happens next is entirely up to you." Finding her voice at last, Violet reached for his hand. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been afraid to admit it even to myself, afraid of being hurt again, afraid of what it might mean for Thomas." "I would never hurt either of you," Noah promised, his voice fervent. "All I want is to protect you, to care for you both. I know." And she did know, with a certainty that had been building since that first night when he had found them in the abandoned barn. This was a man who had already proven his character through countless acts of kindness and support, who had never asked for anything in return. Noah lifted a hand to her cheek, his touch gentle as he brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "May I kiss you, Violet?" In answer, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tender at first, then deepened as Noah's arms encircled her, drawing her close. Violet felt as though something long broken inside her was finally healing, the pieces of her heart fitting back together in a new and stronger pattern. When they finally drew apart, Noah rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "I've wanted to do that for a very long time." "So have I," Violet admitted with a small laugh, "though I tried to convince myself otherwise." From the bedroom came Thomas's cry, as if the baby sensed the momentous shift that had just occurred. "I should check on him," Violet said reluctantly. Noah nodded, releasing her but catching her hand before she could move away entirely. "Violet, there's something else I want to ask you, but not tonight. Tonight is just for us to acknowledge what we feel for each other. The rest can wait until you're ready." Violet squeezed his hand, understanding what he wasn't saying. "Thank you for understanding." As she went to tend to Thomas, Violet felt lighter than she had in years, as though a burden she had been carrying had finally been set down. Whatever the future held, she would face it with Noah beside her, and that made all the difference. Christmas Eve arrived with a fresh blanket of snow covering Council Bluffs in pristine white. The church was filled to capacity for the evening service, with Violet students proudly performing the carols they had practiced for weeks. Thomas, dressed in a new outfit sewn by Mrs. Miller, watched the proceedings with wide eyes from Noah's lap, occasionally reaching up to pat the deputy's beard with fascination. The community dinner that followed was a joyous affair, with tables groaning under the weight of roast turkeys, hams, and all manner of side dishes and desserts. Violet found herself surrounded by friends, accepted as part of the community in a way she had never expected when she first arrived in Council Bluffs. As the evening drew to a close, Noah escorted Violet and Thomas back to the teacherage through the softly falling snow. Thomas had fallen asleep on Noah's shoulder, his little face peaceful in the glow of the lantern Noah carried. "It was a wonderful Christmas Eve," Violet said, her arm linked through Noah's free one. "The children performed beautifully." "They have an excellent teacher," Noah replied with a smile. "The whole town is talking about how much they've improved since you arrived." Violet blushed at the praise. "I've only tried to give them what they deserve, a chance to learn to better themselves. You've given them more than that. You've shown them kindness, patience. Those are lessons just as important as reading and arithmetic." When they reached the teacherage, Noah carefully transferred Thomas to his crib while Violet built up the fire in the stove. The small cabin was cozy and warm, decorated with the pine boughs and star Noah had brought earlier in the week, along with paper chains and ornaments made by her students. "I have something for you," Noah said when he returned from the bedroom. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red ribbon. "Merry Christmas, Violet." Violet accepted the gift with trembling hands. "But I haven't anything for you. You've given me more than you know," Noah interrupted gently. "Open it." Inside the package was a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. When Violet opened it, she found a tiny photograph of Thomas on one side. The other side was empty. "I thought perhaps we might find a photograph of you for the other side," Noah explained. "So I can keep you both close to my heart when we're apart." Tears sprang to Violet's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's beautiful, Noah. Thank you." Setting the locket carefully on the table, Violet moved closer to him, placing her hands on his chest. "I do have something for you after all," she said softly. "Oh," Noah's eyebrows raised in question. "My answer to the question you haven't asked yet," Violet continued, her heart racing but her mind clear. "The answer is yes, Noah. Yes, I will marry you if that's still what you want." The joy that bloomed on Noah's face was all the confirmation she needed. He pulled her into his arms, lifting her slightly off her feet in his enthusiasm. "Are you sure?" he asked when he finally set her down again. "I don't want you to feel rushed, I'm sure," Violet interrupted. "Life is uncertain, Noah. If these past years have taught me anything, it's that happiness should be embraced when it's found, not postponed out of fear or doubt." Noah reached into his pocket again and withdrew a simple gold band. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment." "It was my grandmother's." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Violet felt a sense of rightness, of coming home after a long journey. "It's perfect." Their kiss was a promise, a beginning. When they finally parted, Noah's eyes were bright with emotion. When would you like to be married?" Violet considered the question. "I don't want to wait long, perhaps after the new year. It would give us time to make arrangements, but not so long that it feels like an eternity." "The first Sunday in January," Noah suggested. "If that suits you." "It suits me perfectly." Violet glanced toward the bedroom where Thomas slept. "What about Thomas? Will you?" "I'd like to adopt him officially if that's all right with you," Noah said without hesitation. "I already love him as if he were my own." The simple declaration sealed any lingering doubts in Violet's heart. This was right. This was where she and Thomas belonged. "I love you, Noah Walters," she said, reaching up to touch his face. "And I love you, soon-to-be Violet Walters," he replied with a smile that promised a lifetime of happiness. News of their engagement spread through Council Bluffs like wildfire. The women of the town immediately began planning, offering to help with everything from Violet's dress to the wedding dinner. The men slapped Noah on the back in congratulation, many commenting that it was about time the deputy found himself a wife. The first Sunday in January 1877 dawned clear and cold, the prairie landscape glittering under a layer of fresh snow. Violet stood in Mrs. Miller's bedroom at the boarding house, where she had come to prepare for the ceremony. The older woman was helping her arrange her hair, weaving white ribbons and small winter flowers through the dark strands. "You look beautiful, my dear," Mrs. Miller said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Deputy Walters won't know what hit him." Violet smoothed the front of her dress, a simple creation of ivory satin that Mrs. Pembroke had helped her sew. It wasn't fancy by Eastern standards, but it was the finest garment Violet had ever owned. "I can hardly believe this is happening," she confessed. 6 months ago I had nothing. Now you have a home, a position respected in the community, and a good man who loves you and your son," Mrs. Miller finished for her. "The good Lord works in mysterious ways." A knock at the door revealed Sarah Pembroke, holding Thomas in his new suit. "Someone wanted to see his mama before the big moment," she said with a smile. Violet gathered her son into her arms, careful not to wrinkle her dress. "Hello, my darling. Are you ready to become a Walters today?" Thomas gurgled happily, reaching for the ribbons in her hair. Violet laughed, gently redirecting his curious hands. "Soon enough, little one, soon enough." The church was filled to capacity when Violet arrived. Mayor Hayes had offered to escort her down the aisle in the absence of her father, and she gratefully accepted his arm. Thomas was carried by Mrs. Miller, who would sit with him during the ceremony. As the church door opened and Violet stepped inside, her eyes immediately found Noah waiting at the altar. He looked handsome in his best suit, his expression one of awe as he watched her approach. In that moment, all the hardships of her past seemed to fall away, leaving only this perfect present and the promise of a shared future. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When it came time for the vows, Noah's voice rang clear and true. "I, Noah Walters, take you, Violet Bennett, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love, honor, and cherish you in sickness and in health, in good times and bad, for as long as we both shall live. And I make this same promise to Thomas, to be the father he deserves, to guide him, protect him, and love him as my own son from this day forward." Tears blurred Violet's vision as she repeated her own vows, adding a special promise to support Noah in his duties as deputy, and to create a home where he could always find peace and comfort. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Noah's kiss was both tender and passionate, drawing good-natured cheers from the assembled townspeople. Mrs. Miller brought Thomas forward, and Noah lifted the baby into his arms, completing their new family circle. The celebration that followed at the town hall was joyous and lively. Children ran between the tables, music played, and the dancing continued well into the evening. Violet and Noah moved among their friends and neighbors, accepting congratulations and well wishes from everyone. As the night drew to a close, Noah whispered in Violet's ear, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Walters?" The name sent a thrill through Violet. "Yes, I believe I am, Mr. Walters." They collected a sleepy Thomas and made their way through the crisp winter night to the teacherage, which had been transformed in their absence. Fresh flowers adorned every surface, the bed was made with new linens, and a fire blazed warmly in the stove. "The ladies of the town," Noah explained with a smile. "They wanted to make our first night special. After settling Thomas in his crib, they stood together in the main room, suddenly shy in this new context despite all they had already shared." "I still can't quite believe it," Violet admitted, looking down at the gold band on her finger. "That I could be this happy after everything." Noah drew her into his arms, his expression serious. "You deserve every happiness, Violet. You and Thomas both." and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." As his lips met hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, Violet knew with absolute certainty that she had found what she had been searching for all along. Not just shelter from the storm, but a love strong enough to weather any challenge, and a family bound together not by obligation or circumstance, but by choice and devotion. 5 years later, on a warm spring day in 1882, Violet Walters stood on the porch of their home on the outskirts of Council Bluffs, watching as Noah taught 6-year-old Thomas how to throw a lasso. The boy's face was a study in concentration, as he mimicked his father's movements, his dark hair falling across his forehead in a way that reminded Violet so much of Noah that it sometimes took her breath away. Though Thomas knew the truth of his parentage, Violet and Noah had agreed to be honest with him when he was old enough to understand. It made no difference in the bond between father and son. In every way that mattered, they were family, bound by love rather than blood. "Mama, look, I did it," Thomas shouted as the small rope loop settled around the fence post he'd been aiming for. "I see, sweetheart." "Well done," Violet called back, smiling at her son's achievement and at the proud expression on Noah's face. From inside the house came the sound of a baby's cry. Violet turned and went inside to the cradle where their 3-month-old daughter, Elena Rose, was awakening from her nap. Lifting the infant into her arms, Violet returned to the porch just as Noah and Thomas were coming up the steps. "Is Ellie awake already?" Noah asked, dropping a kiss on Violet's cheek before gently stroking his daughter's dark curls. "I swear she sleeps less each day. She doesn't want to miss anything," Violet replied with a laugh, too curious for her own good. Thomas peered at his baby sister with the mixture of fascination and mild suspicion that had characterized his reaction to her since her birth. "Can I hold her, Mama? I'll be careful." "Of course you can." Violet helped Thomas sit in the rocking chair before carefully placing Elena in his arms, adjusting his hold to support her head properly. "There you go, just like that." The sight of her children together filled Violet with a joy so complete it almost hurt. Looking up, she caught Noah watching them, his expression a mirror of her own emotions. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. Noah's smile was gentle as he put an arm around her waist. "I was thinking about that night in the barn. How different everything might have been if I hadn't decided to check the property that evening." Violet leaned into his embrace, remembering the desperate young woman she had been, afraid and alone with a baby and no prospects. "I believe we would have found each other somehow, even if not that night. Some things are meant to be." Noah's arm tightened around her. "I like to think so too." From the rocking chair, Thomas called, "Pa, will you tell us the story again, about how you found me and Mama?" It was his favorite tale, though he'd heard it countless times. Noah settled onto the porch step, pulling Violet down beside him. "Well, it was a cold night in September," he began, his deep voice taking on the storyteller's cadence that Thomas loved. "I was riding the boundaries of the county, checking abandoned properties, as was my duty as deputy." As Noah recounted their beginning, how her baby had slept in a basket of straw, and how he had declared that the child would sleep in his arms that night, Violet rested her head on her husband's shoulder, grateful beyond words for the life they had built together. From that moment of compassion had grown a love that sustained them through all the challenges of frontier life, the harsh winters, the uncertain harvests, the occasional troubles that came with Noah's position as law enforcement in a growing community. Through it all, they had remained steadfast in their commitment to each other and to their family. Noah had eventually been elected sheriff when old Hawkins retired, and Violet continued teaching until Elena's birth, with plans to return once their daughter was a bit older. Their home, a proper house Noah had built with his own hands on land just outside town, was a gathering place for friends and a haven for their children. It wasn't grand or fancy, but it was filled with love and laughter, which was all either of them had ever truly wanted. As the sun began to set over the Iowa prairie, casting long golden shadows across their land, Violet felt a sense of contentment so complete it seemed almost miraculous. From the depths of despair, she had found her way to this moment surrounded by the family who had chosen her, just as she had chosen them. And that, Noah concluded, reaching out to ruffle Thomas's hair, is how our family began. With a brave mama, a sleeping baby, and a deputy who recognized a treasure when he found one. And now we live happily ever after, Thomas added with the certainty of a child who had known nothing but love and security. Noah's eyes met Violet's over their children's heads, filled with all the love and promises kept over the years. Yes, Violet agreed softly, her heart full as she gazed at the three people who had become her world. Now we live happily ever after. And in the gentle prairie evening, with the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, they did just that.